Thought I'd change my sweater. I think I've worn the same sweater for about every interview I've ever done.
Really?
Yeah, just a nice blue sweater. And Cindy goes, change it up a little bit. I mean, this is supposed to be, you know, even those that do a long sessions after an hour, they, you know,
Change it.
Price is Right, they at least
Yeah, right, yeah.
go out and
New
change
tie.
wardrobe.
It's a really good color for video, though.
Good. Okay.
Are you hearing me all right there?
I can hear you fine, and we're actually rolling.
All right, then I guess we can start.
Yeah.
Hello, this is Dennis Webster from radio station WJTN, and I speak to you from the Robert H. Jackson Center in Jamestown. This is the third in a series of interviews with Greg Peterson, a partner in the Phillips Lytle law firm working in the Jamestown office, and one of the founders of this center, a place dedicated to the life and work of Robert H. Jackson. Greg, thank you for sitting down with me once again.
Thank you. Thank you for your sense of humor to continue to do this.
The Jackson Center sprang to life in the early 2000s. With Greg's inspiration and exceptional support from the local community and beyond, the concept became a reality housed in this building in downtown Jamestown, all in a very short period of time. With that impetus, Greg Peterson, along with the board and administration here, began a robust series of programs featuring many of the people who had worked with Robert H. Jackson on the Supreme Court and at the Nuremberg war crimes trials following World War II. Those programs were all recorded, creating a video archive capturing in-person stories of Jackson's life as a justice, prosecutor, and human being. And it is at that point that we resume. Greg, for those who've not been to the Kappa Theater, where we record these interviews, on the walls here are extraordinary photographs, large black and white photographs from the Nuremberg war crimes trials. And I understand that just to look at one is to see history of 75 years ago right before your very eyes. How did those pictures get here?
The backstory is that there was a book authored by Joe Persico on Nuremberg, which subsequently was the basis of a movie called Nuremberg, starring Alec Baldwin as Robert Jackson. That book I recommend it. It's an easy read, and it gives you a general overview. And within it, it had a number of portraits of people who were part of the trial. One of them was the photographer named Ray D'Addario. And when we got started, I didn't know where to begin to bring people here who might be of interest. So I looked and found the acknowledgments, and it mentioned Ray D'Addario of Holyoke, Massachusetts. So I look in the phone book. Next thing you know, he's there. Next thing you know, I call him. And I said, do you still have your photos? The answer was yes. Have you ever displayed them? The answer was no. Would you like to display them? Absolutely. I told him of the Robert Jackson Center. He goes, well, that's my hero. So we made arrangements working through Jamestown Community College and the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation to work with Ray where he could select 100 of his best photos, send them to us. We would then in turn turn it into a slideshow. He and his wife Marguerite would come here for a couple days, and so he came. We blew up, as you'll see along the wall here, oh gosh, maybe 25 of them. And there we put them up at what was going to be a temporary display, most of them black and white, but some were color. Mm-hmm. And the color ones, just I could digress for a second, was brand new at the time. His actual job working for the Army was covering the Nuremberg trial in black and white because he could get those pictures immediately prepared. He was monkeying around, if you will, with color through film that his mother had sent him from Holyoke, something called Kodachrome. Huh. Kodachrome, and so he would take these pictures experimentally and send them off to London to be processed. Well, the prize picture here is one in color of Jackson at the podium, which the aperture, for those camera people, of which I remember, You used to have, 200, 400, 800, 1600. His was a 10. 10. Woof, woof. So you can see the slowness to capture the color. So the picture itself, the color picture of Jackson at the podium, is magnificent because it's so clear of him at the podium, and immediately everybody around him in the background disappears just because of the speed. So he came here, talked about what he did there, and then further described in his own words underneath each photo what the photo meant and the reason for them. It was magic. It was going to be a 6-month display, and here we are from 2002 to 2021. It's still here, and it's one of our real marquee pieces.
A couple of things resonate with me, and I'll just follow up with you on them. One of them is that, as it seemed when we talked about the Nuremberg prosecutors who had worked with Jackson, or those who had been associated with him there, and maybe even some of the clerks who had assisted him at the Supreme Court, there's this sense that they were waiting to be asked by somebody to come and gather and reflect on the work of Robert H. Jackson, and they just never had been asked. From 1946 to 1954 to 1999 till you came and pressed the button. Just another one of those sort of serendipitous kind of moments that happened in the formation of and the early years of the center. Really unbelievable.
Yeah, they went on with their lives, and there was no venue, no gigs, no speaking tours, nothing. They came home after the war. These are all war vets, and went on to their lives. Ray had to set up a photographic studio and frankly displayed very little of what he did at Nuremberg and just went on.
His style, though, is quite dramatic. I was doing a little background research as I look at the pictures on the wall here, and those that actually occurred in the courtroom, particularly, could not be done with flash. Apparently, he had to do everything, as you said, with a very slow shutter speed in order to get any light into the lens at all. And when you look at what he was able to capture under those circumstances, it's really quite exceptional. What kind of, you and I weren't there, Nuremberg war crimes trials, what sense of the place do you get looking at the pictures that are on the wall here and knowing what you know? And there's a lot that you do in terms of this moment and the 75th anniversary of the war crimes trials, and another project that you're involved with where you were actually digging deep into everything that was said there. What do you think about, what do you feel when you look at these?
I think it gives you a real sense of the individuals. Often when they're responding to the pictures you see, some of it's action items, some of it's of the defendants themselves, some of which I'm looking one now over my left shoulder, Rudolf Hess, who's about as Germanist, square-jawed as you're ever going to get, with the defendant immediately behind him putting up his folder, and because he doesn't want his picture taken. So you got Hess looking straight ahead, square-jawed, and behind him is, I guess it was von Schirach. He just said, "I don't want my picture taken," pulls up his folder, and you don't see his face. To me, that speaks volume. I don't necessarily want to be associated with Hess. I don't want to be associated with a trial. But nevertheless, that's a color photo. And you see that throughout, and kind of the action, the color, and the lighting. It really was, Ray did a magnificent job. Postscript, when Ray wasn't at the trial, he was out taking pictures of Nuremberg.
Streets of Nuremberg.
Yeah, and
what kind of shape was the city in at that point?
it was 90% of it was described as 90% being demolished. The courthouse itself was somehow preserved, and they had to be renovated, but it was preserved. So he would take all these pictures and then went back 20 years later to the same location and took pictures and then created a book which became a bestseller in Nuremberg. Nuremberg, then and now, the Phoenix thing. And that was a big part of Ray's life.
You think about the people that have been mentioned, you have talked about in the previous couple of interviews that we have done. And with the exception of Robert H. Jackson, I don't know that many of them would be household names in terms of the people who initially came here. Very important to the legacy of Robert H. Jackson and to his work, but not people who was name could be mentioned at the dinner table and everybody would say, I know who that is. Sure. That changed in 2003 when you had a guest here that fundamentally everybody knew. How was it that the Chief Justice of the United States, William Rehnquist, came to speak at the Robert H. Jackson Center?
One that was always an idea is, gee, the Chief Justice of the United States, the head of the judiciary of the United States, was a clerk of Robert Jackson. So we knew that. That's a fact. And it was underscored when we got started through my interview with George Niebank, who was Jackson's clerk, or a clerk of Justice Jackson, but also the co-clerk with Rehnquist, and Niebank had kept in contact. Mm-hmm. So he said, essentially, I don't know if I can help you at all get him, but you should do it. Well, the magic occurred at Lissandro's. Lissandro's.
Now, wait a minute. You're talking about the restaurant on North Main Street in Jamestown?
Correct.
Which is a fine eatery, sort of a diner kind of eatery. Come in for lunch or breakfast and enjoy something. Okay.
And so...
Tell us the story.
Serendipity. I'm there having lunch, and a frequent visitor there for lunch is Dan Johansson, still is. And Dan came up one day and says, hey, I just been reading about Jackson Center. I look forward to seeing it. By the way, the clerk of the Supreme Court, who is her name is Kathy Arberg. And Kathy Arberg, I know her, she's my age, and Kathy Arberg's family and my family are best friends. We'd meet often in Sugar Grove, Pennsylvania. So she's a Sugar Grove, Pennsylvania person. So that's a name. Why don't you should call her and see how you might get access to Chief Justice Rehnquist.
Now, what's her role again?
She was the clerk, staff secretary for all of the court.
Okay.
So she's
U.S. Supreme Court, Washington, D.C.
Supreme Court, Washington, D.C.
From Sugar Grove.
Now I call and I said, I'm looking for Kathy Arberg. And I get to her, introduce who I am because of Dan Johansson, drop a few names, and said, here's the dream. Here's the dream. I'd love to have Chief Justice Rehnquist come here, Robert Jackson, da-da. And oh, by the way, I bring greetings from Sugar Grove, Pennsylvania. Drop all of this. And she's very gracious and nice and still there at the court. Said, all right, here's what I would recommend you do. One, write a letter to him, but send it to me. Send it to me, and I will make sure that at least it gets in the right hands. That's the inside baseball stuff that was essential. So I did. Next thing you know, I got an inquiry from his staff person and said, he's interested. He's not traveling at all, but he's interested. He was at an age and health-wise, but given it's his boss, he may make an exception. So let's talk dates. And so we just said, look, our date is your date. Let's just make this clear. And so we selected on May 17th, 2003, and the only stipulation was, they can't get paid, by the way, they don't get paid to do this, was because he had a very chronic back injury, or back situation, he could not fly commercial and have to fly privately. Now, you say, okay. So now you're thinking expenses, and this may be problematic. So because...
And to this point, I should, from the previous videos, you didn't pay much for people to come here anyway.
No. I should point out, we never paid anybody.
Well, you said it more bluntly than I, but yes, go ahead.
And so now though we do have a potential big expense, a jet to get him here privately. So now I have to kind of, I'm at the ballpark. You'll love this. I'm at the ballpark in 2002. I'm not sure if it was known as Russell E. Dietrich Park then or not, but anyways, ballpark. And it was John Dandies of Rich Products was there. John Dandies, Jammers were owned by Rich Products, and John was the president of baseball operations, sitting there. And I'm kind of musing about what I've got, how do I pull this off in May? So this is like a year ahead of time. So I'm talking to him, I said, you got any ideas, John? He goes, who is it we're trying to bring here? Chief Justice Rehnquist. Let me see what I can do. But he said nothing else. That's all he said. I said, okay. Next day I get a call from John Danny's. It's all taken care of, Greg. What sense? Well, Rich Products has a couple of jets. And Bob Rich Sr. often uses those jets to pick up Presidents Bushes, and just they go golf together. So he's well connected. So we'll make that, you make the arrangements, we'll make it happen, we'll get the jet down there and pick him up. So a huge check mark. So that, we can contact him and say, we can make this happen. In the meantime, I start corresponding with his staff and him directly, and he's writing these handwritten notes to me, telling me stories, which is incredible. I'm having the Chief Justice like we're pen pals. And he just wanted to talk. So in anticipation of May 17th, 2003, we had to figure out what we were doing here. We had bought this place 2 years earlier, and it was in terrible condition. So to have the Chief Justice here changed what was going to be a 5-year plan into a 2-year plan.
Obviously.
And now, all of a sudden, a lot of phone calls to a lot of benefactors, even benefactors who didn't know they were going to be benefactors, saying, hey, we need to do this room, this room, this room, and we can't have the Chief Justice. This area here was terrible. We got to be prepared. So everything happened very quickly. Flagpoles went up, headstones went out front, driveways got completed, this theater got completed, from the Stan and Sarita Weeks to the number of foundations, all contributed because of Rehnquist. The Chief Justice is coming, we cannot be embarrassed. The front porch, you name it, and the sod, even the sod out front, we were not ready for it. So we had to lay down sod. The story's a legend, is that it rained. It was raining, and we were going to have hundreds of people in the front on the 4th Street to see the Chief Justice, because we can't bring him in here, and I didn't want to give up this physical space, so we did it off the front porch.
Right.
And there, we was going to speak to the mass. We had like 200 or 300 people with seats, and we had to bring in the last minute plywood, reams of, I don't know if that's the term, of plywood to put down, so we put the chairs on top of so people could listen to the Chief Justice.
And not sink in the sod.
And not sink. And we had C-SPAN trucks. We had everything because it was Rehnquist speaking on behalf of his boss, Jackson. The other thing, forgotten in the dustbin of history, is there was rumors floating around that Rehnquist was going to resign and retire. And there was a thought in Washington that he would do so away from Washington, maybe here, during the time when he's honoring his boss. So there was all kinds of speculation and a lot of New York Times types people here waiting for something that they didn't know was really going to happen. I'm thinking, oh my gosh. So a lot happened, and we have a playbook like this because we had to literally negotiate every minute of when he was here. I'll try to do the Reader's Digest. I flew down on the jet with my daughter, who was a law student, into Dulles. Mm-hmm. We went to a private area, and there was one marshal that walked him out. I met him, got on a jet, and so it's Chief Justice of the United States, Greg Peterson, and my daughter, who was in law school. And I must tell you, in the plane, he's very grandfatherly, very funny, quick, like that. Once we got off the plane, he turned into a Chief Justice, very austere, and played the role.
Two things come to mind right away. I want to talk to you about his address here and what it meant for the center and what he did say and maybe what he didn't say. But first, what did he write to you? Just give us a flavor of some of the handwritten notes that a former Chief Justice penned to you about Robert H. Jackson as you were developing this center.
He told one story, and I don't know if I've ever even revealed this, so you got a scoop.
Reveal it.
He was talking about, as a clerk, they have, in the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, which is a basketball court on the top floor. And it's also where, nowadays, we know Ginsburg worked out and O'Connor, they have a gym. So one Saturday, Rehnquist goes down there to work out. Being a good Stanford athlete, he's just working out, playing basketball with a couple of clerks, and he uses Jackson's locker on a Saturday, assuming that Jackson would not come into work on Saturday. As would have it, here he is, stark naked, coming out of the shower to go shower, towel down and go in the locker. Who comes in the door but his boss, Robert Jackson, together with some friends from Jamestown. Now, he goes, to say I'm mortified, says Rehnquist, would be an understatement, because he shouldn't be there, first of all, using his boss's locker, all those things.
You bent all the rules.
Yeah, he broke everything. So he was mortified, and he just wanted to tell me that as a Jackson experience, and Jackson just, playfully smiled and said, "I hope you had a good game," and and walked out. But you can imagine, the less said was he was dying 1,000 deaths at that moment. So it's that kind of a revelation that was very personal, and he hand wrote it, and that was remarkable.
What about the day that he came here and the speech that he made? I watched it recently in preparation for this interview today, and I wonder where you were in terms of your understanding of this center the day before he made that speech and the day after. Greg, did it change anything or alter anything in your trajectory here?
Yes, absolutely. It put us on the map because it provided a national venue, C-SPAN. It provided a fact that where is Jamestown? Jackson was his boss, because everybody knew Rehnquist. Not very many people knew who are outside of the Beltway in Washington, Jackson. Now, in the Beltway, in the legal community, he's a commodity. Outside, not so much so. It gave us tremendous exposure. It raised the consciousness level of the Jackson Center, and it frankly put us on a trajectory that we perhaps had to move much faster than anybody contemplated. It's not like we had a strategic plan at the time, but we knew now Rehnquist cast a big light on us. He was here. We had events that followed at the Chautauqua, where we had a lot of the players came just to, cast in the glory of Rehnquist. So it did a lot on many fronts, and we could spend hours on funding opportunities, speaker opportunities, Nuremberg opportunities that happened because of that one moment in time that really started with a conversation in Los Angeles.
So it did bring a brighter light to you in an institution which you've described before already was moving at a pretty good pace in terms of trying to bring people here. As I mentioned earlier, not as well known as William Rehnquist, but you're still bringing people here and already kind of moving things along to develop an archive and all of that. And now it's really even faster, even more intense.
Absolutely.
One thing that I wanted to ask you about was this. You had spoken last time around about Michael Berenbaum and how he came here and talked about this center. And because he had had so much experience with the Holocaust Museum, he laid out for you in short order some things that you could do, that he thought you could do to this place. In his public remarks, at least, William Rehnquist didn't say much about what he hoped the Jackson Center would be. Did he communicate much with you privately about what his expectations would be for this place?
No, I think he was just thrilled that right here in Jamestown, because he felt very strongly that Jackson's jurisprudence is a Jamestown jurisprudence, and therefore to pause and reflect on where somebody came from. Kind of picking up a little bit on Justice O'Connor, what she said in 1996, that this is something that we should be justly proud, and he said that, Jamestown should be justly proud of Robert Jackson, and that from here, somebody could develop a skill set which resulted in the qualities that had. So to that extent, there was that encouragement, but I don't recall anything specifically that he said, why don't you do this kind of program, that kind of program. I must point out that shortly thereafter, he hosted on an event in Washington at the Supreme Court where Senator Christopher Dodd spoke at our encouragement in a relationship with the Supreme Court Historical Society on his Christopher Dodd's dad, Thomas Dodd's relationship with Jackson at Nuremberg. So you don't use the Supreme Court for a social event unless a judge sponsors it. Well, Rehnquist shortly thereafter permitted us to use the Supreme Court in conjunction with the Supreme Court Historical Society. So he stayed involved right up to his death.
Hey, can I use your garage kind of for this event? Just interesting comparison there. Who was Thomas Dodd at Nuremberg?
Thomas Dodd was the administrative trial counsel at the Nuremberg trial. In fact, when you see that, I don't know if at some point we might drop into this movie a color photo of Robert Jackson at the podium, the color photo of D'Addario. Immediately to Jackson's right over his shoulder, that's Thomas Dodd.
Okay.
Who happens to be the father of Senator Christopher Dodd from Connecticut.
You mentioned the Supreme Court Historical Society, and I don't know if this is an appropriate moment to bring that organization into this conversation, but they, again, you said in one of the earlier interviews that we had done, or maybe both of them, that you started out with nothing and began very quickly to build a video archive and attempt to attract some other artifacts or pieces of writing from Robert H. Jackson. So did that Supreme Court Historical Society prove to be a valuable asset in that regard?
Yes, on that part, not only were they very helpful programmatically. We did some events here with the law clerks of Robert Jackson, and they were co-sponsors with us. Mm-hmm. And one of those law clerks, E. Barrett Prettyman Jr., was the vice president of the Supreme Court Historical Society. So his connection with Kathy Shurtleff, who was the executive director, led to other programs here in conjunction with them and there in Washington with our name being attached to it. Now, again, we're kids. We have we're 2 or 3 years old, but we have a name and energy and naivete. And so we just blew ahead. We were the ones that pulled together Senator Dodd. And at no point in the history of the Supreme Court has a sitting senator spoke in the well of the United States Supreme Court until we pulled it off.
Never.
Never. And I didn't fully appreciate it at the time until I was there, one of the speakers, really nervous, in front of this gallery of people in the United States Supreme Court. And there are senators, Supreme Court justices, attorney generals, former solicitor generals, and they're all there to see this historical event. I just thought it was a nice gathering. You know, you look out and you go, holy cow, this is pretty serious. So yes, and that was part of the connection with the Supreme Court Historical Society, because we needed Rehnquist to say, oh, yes, it's good, you can use it, and to get their imprimatur and all the infrastructure that they brought. But they loved working with us. They really did.
Where else do you go, considering, as you said, you're youngsters, new organization, and you're developing a video archive, but where else could you go to find anything else, piece of furniture, other photographs, papers written that had anything to do with Robert H. Jackson that you could either borrow or make your own for this place, Greg? How did you find that part of the archive?
Rehnquist story. So we have Chief Justice Rehnquist, we just talked about him, and one of the benefits is there was a professor at St. Bonaventure, listening to it on C-SPAN. He's telling his son-in-law the next night about this. The son-in-law is an Army officer in just outside Nuremberg. He says to his father-in-law, hey, we have Robert Jackson's desk, Nuremberg desk, on our base. So the father-in-law calls me. I said, what? What? We were planning to go to Nuremberg anyways. So I got a hold of that son-in-law. The son-in-law then gets us onto the base. We then see the desk that Jackson had at Nuremberg, and they had confiscated it after the trial, the Army base, and just was there, sort of there.
It's a piece of furniture.
Piece of furniture. And so I said, we need it. And next thing you know, and it's a long, really long story, but a tip of the hat to Paul Fardink, if you ever watch this, we got it. We got it from the Army, and it's here. It's now in the foyer. But that was a direct result of the Rehnquist, somebody listening, but then knows somebody else. Some of the other furniture we have around here, which is a Supreme Court chair, made in Jamestown by Jamestown Royal, came here because the family had it after he died. The court gave it to him, and there in the back it says Robert H. Jackson plaque, and they brought it here. His Solicitor General chair is here. His table or his desk that he had at in his private office was given to us. Had been stored at the Jamestown Furniture Mart. So once you start beating the drum, and success breeds success, and you start telling people of your victories, if you will, gather stuff, you get calls.
Momentum.
Papers,
letters. Did you find any of those? Was it difficult or easy to find the printed material?
Initially, we had nothing. And I went to, I'll never forget this, picker, an antique picker, Phil Fonte, calls me and he says, Greg, there's a lady down here that's got some 1912 letters from Robert Jackson.
This is locally?
Locally, Faulkner, New York, regarding postmaster appointments. Now, Jackson had to be just out of law school. This is 1913. He was 21. I went down, and sure enough, signed letters to the postmaster, kind of advocating certain names to be postmasters in the area. That was a political plum. And Woodrow Wilson had just been elected president. And Jackson was the only Democrat in Chautauqua County to speak of. So I bought it. I bought them. And I think I spent maybe $80, $100, and I bought 6 or 7 letters. And that was really the first anything we had of Jackson. So you start really talking to all the auction people in the area, all the antique guys who go into the houses. If you find it, let me know. And then they did. They found stuff. And then we would have people who came here from Chautauqua, whose dad was at Nuremberg, and they just wanted to tour. And I'd always conclude by asking, do you have anything? And if so, consider us. Now, again, we're a year old, 2 years old. We have no archive to speak of. And next thing you know, we read about that individual who passed away and or whatever, and boxes of stuff would start showing up, pictures. And then we had got, again, every one of these is an hour-long story, access to the movies that were shot at Nuremberg through the Holocaust Museum. We knew there were films, 20 hours of film. We knew there was in 16 millimeter format. They were not digitized. And so I literally subsequently met with Senator Christopher Dodd, because there's a Dodd Center, by the way, in honor of his dad. And I thought, give us an appropriation to Jackson Center. I'm just boldly going, give us $200,000. Why not? From the Congress, I will in turn go to the Library of Congress and get those digitized, and we'll get 2 copies, one for you, one for me, of the whole. Well, it turns out, having done all that work, and they were about ready to appropriate, that Steven Spielberg had spent his money a few months earlier and had done the same thing,
With the same archive?
same archive. So now, all of a sudden, that archive is available at the United States Holocaust Museum. So then I call my good friends at the Holocaust Museum and say, hey, I didn't know you had that. Could we get a duplicate? And they did. They did. We got it. And the next thing you know, we in turn used all of these 20 hours, and it was in terrible condition, not quality. Quality was great. But there was no order to it, So I had to spend 2 years, and I did, essentially putting 20 hours of film on the floor and re-cataloging it, and editing it, and captioning it, and now it's on our website. It's been on our website for about 10 years. So that's a real archive. That is a huge Robert H. Jackson unique thing that's on the Robert H. Jackson YouTube site, but that came from interest in film, but knowing that it existed and working through a variety of sources, then serendipitously, if you will, stumble onto somebody who says, oh, by the way, Spielberg did it, and why don't you check with his people?
A lot of questions, a lot of places we could go with this at the moment, but I guess 2 points I'll make. One is that your dedication to this center, because I can see you on the floor reassembling frame by frame
Just about.
these 16-millimeter movies, and if anybody's ever looked at one, it's not easy to see what's in one if it's not being projected on a screen, so that is an exceptional piece of work. The other thing, and I'll move past the archive here in a moment, but I got interested in that and wanted to develop it for the viewer just so that they know where you are, how you started and where you are now with the archive here at the Robert H. Jackson Center. Are you missing anything? Is there more out there that you're shaking your head already. What more are you looking for to fill out the archive of the Robert H. Jackson Center, Greg Peterson?
Here's specifically here's what I need, a little piece of his biography. He died in 1954, funeral at St. Luke's, internment at Frewsburg. All the justices went to Frewsburg. All the cars, the Cadillacs are in Frewsburg. They have a big ceremony there. We have nothing, no pictures, anything whatsoever of that moment. Now, nobody normally takes pictures of the funeral graveside service. But given the fact this doesn't happen anywhere around here often, let alone Frewsburg, I gotta believe in my heart of hearts, in a library, in an archive in Frewsburg, is a picture of somebody standing by the road taking a shot of that. Has to be. So that's a missing link. I've given probably 100 speeches looking for that piece of information. There is, I believe, archivally, I'm an audiovisual guy, I believe there are newsreels and other things that are out there that are non-Nuremberg matters when he was Attorney General, Solicitor General, because he was a public figure. Mm-hmm. We have yet to get, and we will get. But that's we were looking for.
How about in terms of papers, speeches, documents related to any court cases that he, decisions that he wrote or drafted? Is all of that here or somewhere?
Yeah, where that is in the Library of Congress, all of Jackson's files, and it's pretty full. As it turns out, the Library of Congress, through a relationship between Dan Bratton and Justice O'Connor and the chief curator.
Dan Bratton, the first executive director.
Yes, thank you. That's another whole story. Sent us a finding aid. And then subsequently, through a grant we got through the Stalker Region Community Foundation and a private donor, we got a microfilm of the entire archive at the Library of Congress. So it's here. And then we subsequently, when microfilms kind of went the way of VHSs, we now have it in a digital format. So that's here for those who want to study and don't want to go to Washington.
Let us move on to some other aspects of the work of the Robert H. Jackson Center. And again, we are talking in the early 2000s. Chief Justice William Rehnquist is just here, and you told us earlier in the hour that you are ready to felt a mandate, a necessity to accelerate programming in a variety of different ways. What different ways, then, What foundations did you lay at that time that were important for a time or maybe even still now?
Well, one of the things we wanted to do was to try to capture very quickly all those who were part of Jackson's first-person experience. As it turned out, we identified 8 of the 11 law clerks, and we had a session with the 1940s law clerks in conjunction with the Supreme Court Historical Society, then another one with the 1950s law clerks, and those were critical. Then we had special events with law clerks who were part of the Brown versus Board on its 50th anniversary, and then on the anniversary of the clerks who were involved in the steel seizure case, and then the clerk and the actual individual involved in the Korematsu case with Fred Korematsu, and then the people who were involved in the Barnett case, including the Barnett sisters. So we kind of had this idea of major events, which were big events in Jackson's Supreme Court world, to capture the people who were alive at the time. All of them have backstories as to how we got Fred Korematsu. How did you get a hold of the Barnett sisters? How did you get the people who were the law clerks on these very specific cases? But just to highlight one, if I could,
Sure.
on Brown. You know, we knew 1954 was that's the iconic Supreme Court case. Jackson was on the court. Jackson did not write the opinion, but we spent about a year and a half studying Brown versus Board here. And we needed funding for that because we didn't have funding for that. So what was critical is perhaps a personal relationship my wife and others had with Carla Howey at Cummins Engine. And as a result, we knew their corporate philosophy was one on diversity, just from the beginning, diversity. And so I made a pitch to Carla saying, hey, we'd like to do X, Y, and Z, and maybe even bring Linda Brown in. Just let's shoot for the world. And she goes, wow, can you put that on paper? I goes, I'm not used to that, but I'll try. And the next thing you know, she got the Cummins Foundation involved out of, in Indiana, Columbus, Indiana. And so here we're 2 years old, 3 years old, and we're pitching Cummins Foundation about a big $50,000 grant. Why not? To put on a spectacle. And so that, together with the Community Foundation, they actually agreed. I reached out to Linda Brown, said, if you're going to have Brown versus Board, let's bring Linda Brown. Well, they agreed. She agreed, and it came with some stipulations, but she agreed, and yes, we did have to pay. That was our first gig. But what Cummins did, not only did they underwrite it, but they also sent their corporate jets out to pick them up in Lawrence, Kansas, to bring them here. So we had events with the law clerks of Brown versus Board, and we had Linda Brown here, and we needed a venue to pull this off. This is the 50th anniversary. Now C-SPAN is all over this. Wow. So we were thinking about doing it here, 200 seats, and that wasn't going to work because every school in the world wanted to be part of this. So then we thought the Reg. Every school wanted to be part of it. That blew right through that capacity. So this is May. We're gonna do this in early May of 2004. Where's a venue big enough? And the only one I could think of was Chautauqua. Well, Chautauqua isn't open. And I went up there and presented it to Chautauqua, and they sort of looked at me cross-eyed, like, what? What? And so they finally, long story, they permitted us to go in, and they cleaned up the place, all the leaves.
Amphitheater.
At the amphitheater in May. And you worry about weather, because you're outdoors.
Exactly, right, it's outdoors.
But buses came from Rochester, Buffalo, place was packed. The infrastructure wasn't really ready for all of the, all the media feeds that were coming in to do this. But we pulled it off. We pulled it off. And to this day, that's, we've had many spectacular events, but Cummins engine, and Cummins brought in their international board to come to this event. Sit in the front row, and I'm thinking, there they are. Oh, they're the top dogs from out the world are there because they're so proud of this.
Couple things. Carla Howie, her role at Cummins at the time?
She's director of community relations,
Okay.
and she was a native of this area. And to her credit, Carla, I hope you hear this sometime, you had enough faith to run it up the flagpole and take it levels to which we were just dreaming about.
And just for the uninitiated, let's cover this ground very briefly. Brown versus Board of Education was very important in the whole world of jurisprudence because?
This was the case which overruled the separate but equal doctrine of education. The law of the land up till 1954 was you could treat and have segregated schools as long as they could be separate, as long as they were equal. And that was a concept, goes back to 1896. So it was Brown versus Board which ruled that unconstitutional. And it's iconic. To this day, if you ask scholars, the #1 Supreme Court case, it's Brown versus Board of Education.
And Jackson's role in that? You said he didn't write the opinion?
He did not write the opinion, but they wanted, first of all, to make sure that case was successful. There's a whole terrific backstory of the what happened there, but Jackson was behind the scenes negotiating with the justices. And in fact, one of the clerks, Barrett Prettyman, there's movies about Barrett and Jackson. You can go get it on Netflix, and you can see them in action as they discuss how they're going to kind of maneuver the cases. Not separate but equal.
Okay.
Anyways, that was of the many events we had, and we wanted to make sure that we had these kind of 1 or 2 a year spectacular events to bring attention. I think you used the term making sure there's something on the marquee. And we usually use the anniversaries to do that.
There are other things that happened here, though, that became a regular part of the regular course of life at the Robert H. Jackson Center. And maybe at least in the few minutes that remain in this hour, Greg Peterson, we could touch on one or two of them. You have a young readers program. And did that get underway in the early years as well?
Yes, and a direct result of Brown versus Board of Education. Because that was 2004, and I was hoping to find a young author, somebody could speak to Brown versus Board of Education. I met Richard Johnson's wife, and JCC, et cetera. And
Community relations there for many years.
yes,
Recently retired.
and so I just chatting, hey, I got a dream. And she worked very closely with the folks from Highlights magazine. And annually, Highlights would have an event at Chautauqua Institution with all of its young authors. I said, is there anybody in that pool who may have written about Brown versus Board? I had no idea, none. So again, a long and complicated story, but she introduced me to the Brown family, who were the founders of the Highlights magazine, Kurt Brown, and he set up a lunch with Jerry Spinelli. Jerry Spinelli, for those who may have read Maniac McGee,
Sure.
That's Jerry. And I knew the name. I never met him, but we had lunch. And I was trying to convince him to see if he might do something on Brown versus Board. And he says, I can't, I'm booked, but I do have a book called Milkweed that's coming out, and it deals with the Holocaust and Warsaw Ghetto and stuff like that. I go, Holocaust, Nuremberg trial, that works. So Jerry, after we had the lunch, we followed up with Jerry, and he agreed to come here to present on his book, Milkweed. And that was our first event. We had places packed with school kids. I think we did one event here and one at the Reg, 1,800 kids. They'd all been exposed to this book on the Holocaust. And we also had an actual friend of Raleigh Kidder's named Helen Fagan, who was in the Warsaw Ghetto herself, came here.
Raleigh was director at that point?
I'm sorry, yeah, Raleigh was a director, executive director. So Raleigh, knowing he was part of this programming, he said, I'll reach out to my friend Helen Fagan. And Helen Fagan was part of the World War II Memorial Committee. It all gets kind of connected. So she came to listen to Jerry's speech, and next thing you know, Jerry brings her up because he's talking about in his book about the Warsaw Ghetto and all that went on during World War II by the Nazis in the Warsaw Ghetto.
And she lived there.
And she lived it. And so he sits down and she just kills it. Wild, wonderful speaker. And the two then just went on and did it together. So that was our first event, and it was magic. And Jerry, now he's well known. He's well known in the young readers community. And he stayed with Cindy and I. So we became friends and continue to be friends. But he gave us then leads to the Lois Lowrys, the Jane Yolans, all people in that genre of high-end Newbery Prize winners that we had access to because of Jerry.
And again, help me understand, why young readers? Why the focus on young people?
Well, I think it's very important that to the Jackson Center mission is to teach teachers and the lessons of some of the concepts that Jackson dealt with. Certainly the Nuremberg trial, the presentation of the Holocaust at the trial, that's a subject matter. A subject matter dealing with Brown versus Board or social justice. Those are important things. So we felt reaching the students, and they would come here bus after bus after bus. I got to be, that was the beginning, and we've had it now for, since 2005, and it's been very successful.
There are other aspects of the sustaining programming here at the Robert H. Jackson Center that maybe we can get into in a future interview, Greg, but we just have a few minutes left today. There's some other things that have come out during the last hour or so that I really want to pin down with you. And one of them is the indefatigability of your approach to this place. And in some ways, it represents a really entrepreneurial method in that it sounds like regardless of whatever you imagined from the common ordinary things like Jackson's papers and any physical archives of his letters from Falconer to the most extraordinary, your approach, your answer is let's try anything always?
Yeah. You never know unless you ask. And I am a follow-up, follow-through guy. So if you have a crazy idea, follow it to its logical conclusion. You may not be successful. We're only talking, today, last few days, we've been talking about successes. We've had ideas which may not have been reached the success I would have liked, but it led to something else which was maybe more successful. But yeah, it's one of those things that, and it's exciting. The reality, it's brand new. It's exciting, it's brand new, and it provides something for the benefit of the community. And I find that really rewarding.
And as Michael Berenbaum informed and helped guide you, if this interview is ever looked at by anybody who's going to build another center for person unnamed at this moment and looking at technique and style and just the way to get it done, some of what you have said in today's interview for sure and the preceding ones as well about bringing together networks of people, whether they were previously connected or not, and then keeping them engaged, remaining in contact with them. This is a real vital aspect of your entire life and work, isn't it?
It takes a village, and perhaps in this case, a whole huge municipality. We continue to stay in touch with those folks who I like to think that they kind of not only feed off perhaps the energy that's already exists, but they provide their own degree of energy, and it's just a vortex of ideas for a common cause. The common cause is the legacy of Robert Jackson, a person from this area who did incredibly well and continues, almost, what are we talking here? almost 70 years after his passing to resonate more than probably immediately after he passed.
Is that when you're at your happiest, when you are able to take those disparate people and those unachievable goals and bring them to the Kappa Theater or to the front door here at the Robert H. Jackson Center in the case of William Rehnquist? Is that the greatest satisfaction for you?
It is. I mean, you can't imagine, we've been going through the 20th anniversary, my archives, because I've always been going forward, never really looking back. Now I'm looking back and I go, whoa, look at all the people we've met, seen, talked to, and they in turn, if they're here, and we capture it like we're doing right now, film, we have something. We have something for our archives which moves the continuum along of the knowledge base of Robert Jackson. I hope sometime we can pull it all together to figure out what it all means, but at least you're moving the ball. And that's why I get a kick out of the interviews. I get a kick out of the opportunities people come here. They hopefully get a good experience, and they tell somebody else. So now you build a body of fans, friends, and so it gets a little easier when you're asking, and they're here in the 20th year, to participate than it was in the first year when you had to explain yourself.
Well, and this also says something about Greg Peterson, the person, in that there are a lot of people who might establish those kinds of networks and connections and eventually just find it so weighty, so hard to keep them all up that it becomes a burden. You don't seem burdened at all. You look like you're still having an awful lot of fun after 20 years, 20 plus years of building all these connections and weaving all of this together.
Yeah, I can't tell you, on a daily basis, this is a little quirky thing, but my iPhone has probably 15 years of pictures that I've taken where, like this, I go take a picture of you, Dennis, and now it's there. It's actually in here, and it pops. These things pop periodically, and the way the phones work out is a photo that was taken 10 years ago just pops. Well, inevitably, it's something that happened here, and it has something to do with somebody and an event, and you just immediately email that to that person and say, great memories. They email back. Now you have a mechanism. The old days, you'd have to write a letter, spend the time, dial up. Now it's just an email. So yeah, perhaps this has permitted an opportunity to continue that, which might be otherwise burdensome, because I used to have a black book like this of names, addresses, phone numbers, maybe an email address. And you'd have to, now it comes up, and since it's already popped in. So yeah, I've enjoyed that, and then they respond back. And the next thing you know, you create a dialogue. Next thing you know, what's new? Next thing you know, they might show up or say, hey, next time I'm in Chautauqua, I'll stop by, and if you want me, I'll give you the Phil Donahues, the Mark Russells, just to drop some names.
We haven't gotten to them yet.
They're friends, and they've done things for us for free, for the benefit of the Jackson Center. And that is ingratiating. Yeah, it has a real personal relationship with me, but it's Jackson. I mean, I'm not lost on me. They're doing it because of Jackson and a feeling about Jackson. They wouldn't do it just because, hey, Greg says do it. It's Jackson. So that's rewarding, especially since 20 years ago, perhaps they would not have known that much about Jackson. Hopefully 20 years later, they do.
So this is the most fun you've ever had.
Well, short of marrying my wife, I better say that quickly,
Speaking of your wife, bring us to a convenient point to conclude this hour's interview with the suggestion that she might appear in that chair sometime in the not-too-distant future, because you have recounted through the first 5 years, 6 years maybe, that we've covered of the Robert H. Jackson Center so far, Greg Peterson, all that you have done to help cultivate this place. What was going on the rest of the time at home might be interesting to find out from her.
I'm looking forward to you interviewing her, and I will not give you, off the camera, I'll give you some tips, but other than that, I'll see what she says.
That's next time in this ongoing series with Greg Peterson, one of the founders of the Robert H. Jackson Center. Once again, we express our appreciation to Kristen McMahon, the president of the Jackson Center today, and the staff here for the opportunity to use the Kappa Theater to record these interviews, as with virtually all the video archive at the Jackson Center. The technical work for these interviews is being done by Ed Tomasini. We speak to you on February 17, 2021, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. As you look at the set here at the Kappa Theater, you'll see that appropriate protocols have been put in place. Greg, I won't see you next time. I'll see your wife.
I'm looking forward to you seeing her. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, she's willing to do it. It took a little bit of convincing, but.
Next week, you are good, Ed?
As far as I know, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you got 2 minutes, I'll just give you a brief overview about her. Pardon?
Should I stop?
What's that?
Should I stop recording?
Yeah, yeah.